Alan Dershowitz spoke yesterday in support of Donald Trump, and he said a lot of really insane things that if people accept the argument he's making, particularly if our senators accept it, it says some pretty dangerous things about the future of America, our presidency, our democracy, our system of government. I want to jump into it. We got a few different video clips here. I'm gonna save the worst for last, so stay tuned for that. But first, here is Alan Dershowitz's little hypothetical to help people understand what's going on.
What if a Democratic president were to be elected and Congress were to authorize much money to either Israel or the Palestinians, and the Democratic president were to say to Israel, no, I'm going to withhold this money unless you stop all settlement growth, or to the Palestinians, I will withhold the money Congress authorized to you unless you stop paying terrorists. And the president said, quid pro quo. If you don't do it, you don't get the money. If you do it, you get the money. There's no one in this chamber that would regard that as in any way unlawful.
Well, perhaps not in that chamber. Our standards for our senators has just dropped lower and lower with every passing year, but it's certainly, even that hypothetical, which is supposed to, it's not what's going on with Donald Trump, and I'll make that clear how. But even that hypothetical, that should not be acceptable, even if the foreign policy goal that was being pursued there is reasonable. Both of the hypotheticals he gave, the stopping the settlement building, the stopping funding for terrorists, all of that, both laudable goals. It is not the province of the president to take legally allocated funding and say, oh, this is designated to accomplish the goals that the legislature is pursuing. No, we're not doing that. In fact, I'm gonna add my own personal thing. Would that be a quid pro quo? Yes. Would it be unlawful? Yes, it would still be unlawful, as the GEO has already made clear. The US government's top internal watchdog concluded earlier this month that the Trump administration broke the law when it withheld military aid to Ukraine last year. And in those hypotheticals that Dershowitz lays out, it would be the same. It is not just unethical, which it is, which he doesn't believe it is, but it is also illegal. And so as we go through the rest of his arguments, remember that all of these things that he's saying are not illegal, they've already been shown to be illegal, not just hypothetically, but the situation we're currently in. But way more important even than that, the example he gave was designed to bamboozle you in a very clear way. He gave two hypotheticals about future presidents engaging in quid pro quos, and he wanted to convince you that, like, hey, those are good, so why isn't this one good? But in both of the hypotheticals he gave, even though they're unethical and even though they are illegal no matter what he says, they're also not representative of the scandal we're involved in right now, because in both of those cases, the hypothetical is taking legally allocated aid designed to accomplish foreign policy goals and adding another quid pro quo on top of that that is designed to accomplish a foreign policy goal. Nowhere in his examples did he provide something that was of the sole personal political interest of the president, which is what we're talking about. Donald Trump was not pursuing his own foreign policy goals for the betterment of America, that he just had a disagreement with the legislature. This was entirely personal to him. And Dershowitz is being fundamentally dishonest in his examples when he provides examples that don't have anything to do with personal political interest. So here is something ridiculous too. To give you an idea of this guy who still has a reputation as being this great legal mind, take a look at this doozy.
The only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo were in some way illegal.
Okay, so the only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo was illegal. Well, yes, it is unlawful if it's illegal. Everybody understands that. What are you talking about? But very importantly, he is missing that in the example he's talking about, it is illegal. The GEO has already said he's broken the law. You're not allowed to do that. There is so much implicit expectation and entitlement of executive authority that underlies everything that these Trump supporters are saying. It doesn't matter what the GEO or any other watchdog agency is saying. It doesn't matter what the law is saying. We see in America where the president, or at least our president, the one in our party, can do anything he wants, and how dare you assert otherwise? I feel like this is an opportunity for us to stand up and say, no, that is not the system we want. We don't want an all-powerful president, whether he's of our party or the other party. It is supposed to be a balanced system. Now, importantly, he seems to understand previously, when I was talking about how his hypothetical is not representative of what's going on, he does seem to get that fundamentally in some level, as he'll sketch out in this video.
There are three possible motives that a political figure can have. One, a motive in the public interest, and the Israel argument would be in the public interest. The second is in his own political interest, and the third, which hasn't been mentioned, would be in his own financial interest, his own pure financial interest, just putting money in the bank.
Okay, so Dershowitz does get that there are different motivations that can all lead to a quid pro quo loosely defined. One is an actual foreign policy interest of the country, whether you agree with it or not. The other is personal political. The third is personal and economic. I want you to bear in mind as we move forward with this impeachment inquiry that for literally years, up to and including today and the rest of his term, we've given him all of the personal economic interests for free. He can do anything he wants, domestically, internationally, taking money from leaders, it being funneled into his organization in any number of different ways. We've given him all of those for free, even though the Constitution very specifically does not allow for that. We are focusing on the second one because we're worried about the precedent that is being set in terms of manipulations of elections. So Dershowitz does appear to get that, but he's immediately gonna jettison that understanding as he lays out this. This is the last video we're gonna show you. This should terrify you. Let's take a look.
I want to focus on the second one for just one moment. Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And mostly you're right. Your election is in the public interest. And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
That is absurd. That is exactly the sort of quid pro quo that should lead to impeachment. So he's saying, if a politician thinks that doing X raises the chance of me being elected, and if I, an awesome guy, are good for the country, then anything done in pursuit of reelection is thereby allowed. It has to be. It's not my personal interest anymore. It's the country's interest, because think about how much the country would be damaged if they didn't have me around anymore. Dershowitz is being brought out not as one of the sort of like partisan political hacks that are gonna defend him in a legal sense. He is being trotted out specifically as an expert on the Constitution, a legal mind that has such a history and so much baked in respect that we're supposed to just buy what he says about this. And he has somehow gone beyond any of the others, the Zeldins and the Cruzes and the Grahams and Sekulow and I know all of them, and said the most bat-esque crazy thing that I've heard. He says, if it's done in pursuit of getting election, how could it possibly be wrong? That's Nixonian to its core, the idea that you could do anything. Well, in that case, any sort of quid pro quo internationally, taking our American foreign policy, military aid, whatever, and just turning it over to your reelection effort will always be allowed. So, if Bernie Sanders is running for reelection someday, he should definitely do that, totally allowed. The Republicans are laying the case out right now. Obama honestly should have done it. Why did he have to have a difficult reelection battle when he could have just rigged things in his favor? It's in the public interest after all. No, but fundamentally, I know that this is gonna seem like an exaggeration, but this really is a time when we have to decide, do we want a president that is bound by the Constitution and checks and balances provided by the two other branches of government, or do we want a king who decides totally of himself that his presence is a public good and any criminality is justified so long as he maintains his position? That his own personal interest, because of an act of sheer will, becomes the national interest is absurd, and we need to be very clear about that. Unfortunately, it looks like the process whereby we would make that clear by removing him from office is probably not going to happen, because far too many of our elected representatives believe that we should have a king and his will should be the national policy. But this whole thing is both absurd, scary, setting a terrible precedent. Thank you for watching this clip from the Damage Report. For more content from the show and access to TYT Network members-only exclusives, go to tyt.com/Brooke. Wait, no, it's tyt.com/John. Go to tyt.com/John to sign up.